Hello, I am Henry Keane and we are UATV. We are online giving you the Ukrainian perspective of reality of war. Watch in the episode. Testing Ukraine, new chance to test your international mil tech in action. Merz and Starmer promise long-range weapons delivery to Ukraine soon. Russian economy is broken, learn why in our report. And please comment and please subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you're joining the fight against criminal Russian aggression. Welcome to the News Pools. Ukraine has launched a new Test in Ukraine platform aimed at testing new weapons directly on the battlefield, directly on the Russians. Thanks to this platform, foreign manufacturers of UAVs, ground robots, electronic warfare systems and AI-based solutions will be able to officially test their products in Ukraine, in the field, meaning actual battlefield. This is a brilliant initiative. Indeed, no testing ground or laboratory can ever show the real potential of any weapon system, even closed in the way you can figure it out in a real combat action. If Russians are willing to die in hundreds of thousands in Ukraine, then why not squeeze out some benefit, at least, of that for the rest of humanity? Let us test the latest weapon systems and technologies against an infamous Russian death wish and see what happens.
Ukraine has already built a unique infrastructure for rapid development of defense innovations. We are ready to help companies from partner countries develop, test and improve technologies that really work on a battlefield. This is an opportunity to gain experience that cannot be modeled in laboratories. Mikhailo Fedorov, Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine.
Now this is the future, pragmatic, useful and open for commercial partnership. Brave One platform provides the testing ground for you. Bring your product and take part in the testing process. This allows you to be directly involved, observe how it performs and make real-time adjustments if they need it. You just hand over your product to Brave One and they take care of the rest. You may provide an online training for them on how to operate your product and they will run the testing themselves and deliver a detailed report with the results. Ukraine will soon receive long-range strike systems. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced. He made the statement following a meeting in London with Ukraine Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Merz emphasized the delivery of these systems will put Ukraine in a significantly stronger position to defend its territory. Keir Starmer called for Putin to start peace talks and end the fighting as soon as possible.
Of course, we spoke in detail about military support for Ukraine, not only about air defense, but also about Ukraine's ability to better defend itself with long-range systems. We call this long-range fire. Ukraine will soon receive substantial additional support in this area, including through industrial partnerships that we have established with Ukraine.
First thing we need to do is to get Putin to the table for an unconditional ceasefire. And that is why we've been talking for some time about peace through strength. And that is why we must provide Ukraine with the capability it needs to be in the strongest possible position, and hence the intense work in recent days and weeks on capability.
The Shchokino Azot, this is the chemical plant in Russia's Tula region, has halted operations following a UAV strike. According to Andrei Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation and Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, the facility makes chemicals like ammonia or methanol, which are used to produce explosives, rocket fuel and other materials for Russia's military. Without this plant working, making missiles, drones and explosives for the Russian army becomes significantly more difficult. Despite the loud statements made by Russian propaganda as usual, the Russian army did not actually manage to achieve the breakthrough they had planned in eastern Ukraine and Sumy region. The head of the Center for Countering Disinformation and the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Andrei Kovalenko, has confirmed.
And the war now is such that the military without equipment on their own feet have to move to the battle line, and often this distance is 15 to 17 kilometers. The front is so saturated with drones, and notional motorcycles are not enough for everyone, and equipment is an easy target. Moreover, drones are now not spared per individual enemy soldier. Therefore, statements about the ability to collapse the front from Russians are rather dubious, and they exist in the information space. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
NATO Commander-in-Chief for Europe, Alexis Grinkevich, has praised Ukraine's armed forces for their ability to innovate in combat conditions. He also specifically mentioned Patriot air defense systems that the allies are preparing for Ukraine.
I'm not going to reveal to the Russians or anyone else the exact numbers of weapons that we're transferring or when those will happen. But what I will say is that preparations are underway. We're working very closely with the Germans on the Patriot transfer, and the guidance that I've been given has been to move out as quickly as possible. So we're doing that, and then we're also looking at other capabilities and what those needs are, and working on proposals for our political leadership.
In the conditions of international isolation and shortage of foreign exchange earnings, Russia is actually launching its own inflation spiral by accelerating money printing. Economists warn such actions are followed not only with the growth of poverty, but also with social upheaval, mass fiscal emission in the conditions of sanctions, and falling GDP may lead to destabilization of the entire financial system of the country.
Они просто печатают деньги.
They are simply printing money massively. They are using this printed money to replace the bank's capital. As a result, the banking system is collapsing. Right now, the situation is such that several banks in Russia are essentially being propped up by the central bank. But instead of real capitalization, it's just flooding the system with monopoly money. These fake funds flow through the bond market into the finance industry. In other words, banks buy government bonds, and then the finance ministry uses that printed money to plug holes in the federal budget.
So here is what is happening. The Central Bank of Russia, through simple, straightforward and constant and actually stupid printing hard cash, provides financial support to banks that lack capital. This process essentially replaces the bank's capital with new money. Next, this new money, cash, flows into the bond market, purchasing government bonds from the Ministry of Finance of Russia. Yes, so ultimately, this printed new based-on-nothing money is used to cover the real budget deficit. And it is working for some time, until it doesn't. Putin is afraid of the war's end, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said in an interview with Newsmax. The Ukrainian leader also stressed that the Kremlin dictator has no clue what to do with more than 1 million of mobilized for this war, so he just can't stop.
Putin has mobilized 1,200,000 Russians. More than 1 million have already been killed or wounded. Today he still has about 1,200,000 troops on the battlefield. Why does he fear an end to the war, a ceasefire? One reason is that these people will come home. And what will they come home with? What will happen to them? Psychologically, they are unstable. They didn't fight defending their homes. They are unhealthy. They fought a war for what? They will come back different. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, in an interview with Newsmax.
Increased economic pressure on Russia will significantly accelerate the end of the war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy confirmed in an interview with the New York Post. Zelenskyy believes that the effect of new sanctions could lead to social changes within the aggressor state.
They, Russians, are not as free as our Ukrainian people are, as Europeans. But it's not only about mentality. They are simply afraid that somebody will take away their money or that they will be sent to prison. But when they have less opportunity to get food, their comfort level will go down. When opportunities will decrease and they will be laid off, they will be redundant because of the economy. Employer will fire them. Then a social explosion can come. I think such things will influence him. That's why we want want to put pressure on the Russian economy because the economy directly affects his military capacity. He wants to have an influence on the economy because economy will influence his military sector. President Trump can deliver this message to Putin. The earlier, the faster. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, in an interview with the New York Post.
The Russian State Duma is working on the possibility of state regulation of purchase prices for just basic foodstuffs. This is reported by Russian propaganda media, not us. Officials say that state control will make it possible to eliminate the possibility of making any frenzy around key products. According to Rosstat, last year, food inflation in the country set a 9-year record of 11.5%. By the end of May 2025, it had accelerated to 12.5%. Such as up. Potatoes rose in price by 173%. This is the maximum figure for 23 years of available official statistics. The annual price increase for butter, for example, reached 34%. For cabbage, 28%. For onions, 41%. Apples, really apples, becomes more expensive for the year by 20%, fish by 25%. Milk and dairy products also became increasingly expensive. The EU countries have approved the 18th package of sanctions against Russia, writes Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty correspondent Richard Józwiak. Earlier, it was reported that the 18th package would include, in particular, the dynamic formation of a ceiling, a cap on Russian oil prices, a ban on the operation of the Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines, and new restrictions on Russian banks. Slovakia, however, opposed the new package. Bratislava demanded guarantees from the EU to compensate for possible damage from a complete ban on Russian gas supplies to the Union. Fico said the day before that the country had actually received the guarantees.
We are standing firm. The EU just approved one of its strongest sanctions package against Russia to date. We're cutting the Kremlin's war budget further, going after 105 more shadow fleet ships, their enablers, and limiting Russian banks' access to funding. Kaja Kallas, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy on X social network.
And while Europe has agreed upon the new 18th sanctions package against Russia, Russia is forced urgently to raise taxes to save the budget. Russian officials are looking for ways out of the economic abyss, no less. Thus, the Federation Council Committee on Budget and Financial Markets said that the authorities need to provide additional revenues for the Treasury, which was damaged severely by the reduction of oil and gas revenues in particular and general deterioration in the economy. My colleague Yulia Granovska will explain the issue in more detail for you.
Russian officials are scrambling to plug holes in the federal budget. As expected, Western sanctions targeting Russia's oil refining industry are starting to show their impact. According to the Russian Ministry of Finance, oil and gas revenues fell by 17% in the first half of the year, while overall revenues grew by just 3%. In real terms, accounting for inflation, this means revenues are now shrinking, while spending has surged by 20%. As a result, over the first 6 months of this year, the Russian budget deficit has grown sixfold compared to the same period last year, reaching 3.7 trillion rubles. Analysts warn that unless there are drastic cuts to military spending in 2025, the Russian economy could plunge into crisis by 2026.
We're already seeing signs of economic disintegration. At the beginning of the year, there was debate over whether Russia could manage a soft landing. Now it's looking more like a crash landing. We're not talking about a mild slowdown anymore. We're talking about a recession. For context, the extractive sector has been declining for some time, and according to Rosstat, industrial output is also falling. We had a period of stagnation in manufacturing, but now the situation is deteriorating sharply. That's why, just days ago, Putin ordered the government to do everything possible to prevent a drop in manufacturing output and sales.
Due to falling oil prices, Russia is now discussing potential emergency spending cuts, Bloomberg reports. In July, Russian Urals crude is selling at an average of $58 per barrel, down from $70 at the start of the year.
The reserves used to patch up budget shortfalls are running out. the liquid assets in the National Welfare Fund, which stood at $120 billion before the invasion of Ukraine, had dropped to $52.6 billion by July 1, 2025, a 2.5-fold decrease. If oil prices remain low, those reserves could be completely exhausted by next year, according to economists from the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration, RANEPA, as quoted by the Moscow Times.
The federal treasury is growing increasingly cash-strapped, with 1 out of every 3 rubles now spent on the war in Ukraine. That's the highest share of military spending since the Soviet era, and officials haven't come up with anything better than reaching yet again into the pockets of Russian citizens. The head of the Federation Council's Budget and Financial Markets Committee, Anatoly Artemonov, has proposed cutting social benefits and raising taxes. Meanwhile, one of the key suppliers of televisions to Russian brands, the Kvant factory, has not paid its employees since December 2024. Total wage arrears have surpassed 60 million rubles.
Between April and July 2025, 24 lawsuits were filed against the company over unpaid wages, according to data from the Moscow City Court. Some of the cases were suspended or left without action, 8 were partially satisfied, 1 was dismissed entirely, and 15 are still under review, from the Moscow Times publication.
The plant has also stopped production of its only TV model under the Urbis brand. The reason? A lack of government orders and a shortage of components, the result of shrinking imports from China. Chinese companies, wary of secondary sanctions, have begun limiting direct exports of goods and specific components to Russia. And if U.S. President Donald Trump follows through on his promise to impose secondary sanctions, Russia could lose its largest oil customer, India. India's energy ministry has stated it is increasing its own oil exploration and production and can meet its needs from alternative suppliers if Russian exports are disrupted.
I'm not worried at all. If something happens, we'll deal with it. India has diversified the sources of supply, and we have gone, I think, from about 27 countries that we used to buy from to about 40 countries now. Hardeep Singh Puri, Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas of India, from the Reuters publication.
Reported by Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
Well, that was it for today. My name is Henry Keane and we are News Bulls at UATV. Well, thank you so very much for your time and for your attention. We appreciate that. Thank you so very much. Please join our fight for freedom and sovereignty by subscribing and commenting. Your voice helps Ukrainian voice to be heard worldwide. Hope to see you soon. Stay tuned and goodbye.